Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about Shadowlands Restoration Shaman. From the rotation to talent builds, Covenant and Soulbind selection, I've got you covered. If you haven't been following the Shadowlands beta, Resto Shaman is looking to be both one of the strongest dungeon and raid healers going into the first season. I'm going to cover the basics in this video too, so if you've already mastered Resto Shaman and are just looking for a quick rundown, check the video timeline. Before I start, I just want to say that everything in this video is just my idea of what's best, from my time testing and talking to some of the best players I know. I'm sure there's going to be some different choices you or other guide creators disagree with, and that's a good thing. Different setups work for different players, and the uniqueness is what makes the game fun. Let's jump right into the basics. Resto Shaman have a wide variety of healing spells, mostly specializing in stacked party healing. Riptide is one of the most mana efficient spells in the game, dealing both initial healing and applying a heal over time effect for 18 seconds. With each cast of Riptide, you gain tidal waves, boosting the next single target heal you cast. The bulk of Shaman healing comes from weaving in Riptides and single target heals to keep players topped. While using the combination of talents and conduits in the guide, you'll find that Shamans have some of the most potent on-demand single target healing in the game. You can't forget Chain Heal and Healing Rain, two iconic Shaman spells that lead to unmatched amounts of group healing. You don't get nearly as much use out of these in dungeons as you do in raid, however there's still a time and a place to use them, especially during the first seasonal affix Prideful. Shaman's Mastery Deep Healing increases healing from your spells based off of the current health of the target. The lower their health, the more you heal for. Although we aren't letting our teammates dip low on purpose, this makes Shamans great for triage healing and catching back up when your teammates need it the most. Shaman have gotten many changes since BFA, although not all of them are entirely useful. Earth Shield is now baseline and is great for sustained tank healing. Generally I'm keeping Earth Shield on the tank for most of the dungeon, however if I know someone else is going to be in trouble and need big healing, I'll switch it to them for a short time. Frost Shock is now available as Resto Spec as well, giving you a quick way to deal damage as well as a filler to press when on the move. I'm not pressing Frost Shock a whole lot in dungeons, however it's a nice button to have. Manatide Totem gives a short burst of mana back every 3 minutes, and while not super impactful in its normal state, pairs great with the legendary item I'll go over later. Water Shield is back as well, and can be maintained on yourself for the entire dungeon. Water Shield slowly regenerates mana, and alongside Manatide, makes Shaman one of the most mana-friendly healers in dungeons right now. I think the best race for Resto is Goblin or Troll for Horde and Dwarf for Alliance. Goblin gain a small amount of haste passively, as well as some much needed mobility and rocket jump. Troll get an unused haste buff that's great to pair with some of their more potent cooldowns. Dwarf not only increases damage and healing from critical strikes, but can also use Stone Form to remove poisons and disease that Shaman otherwise couldn't. Keep in mind that race doesn't affect your performance too much, the difference between races is extremely small in PvE. If you want to pick a specific race because you like the aesthetics, I recommend it. You're going to be looking at your character for many hours, you don't want to be stuck with something you don't like the look of. For stats, you want to prioritize haste, then crit, then verse, and finally mastery. Shaman already have very potent heals. The main problem you'll run into is the longer cast times. Having high haste means you can bomb quick heals into a teammate and they aren't dying mid-cast. Crit and verse are both relatively close together. Generally you want to be favoring the highest item level and getting a mix of both. I'm ranking mastery last because although it can be a potent stat, it's a bit situational and also doesn't help your damage. The hope is that our allies aren't getting low enough health to benefit from mastery very often. It's possible you may run into a point where you start running out of mana with very high haste, or at least you feel you have enough haste. At that point, mainly focus on getting more crit and verse in order to make your heals more potent. Usually, going with the highest item level pieces you have, while slightly favoring haste, will give you a solid stat distribution. When it comes to trinkets, you're mainly looking for big stat bonuses, specifically haste. I've come to like Unbound Changeling as my #1 trinket. Changeling has moderate uptime and provides a reasonably reliable stat boost. For your second trinket, you have a lot of options, depending on your preference and way to acquire it. The PvP trinkets, Sinful Aspirant's Insignia and Badge, seem like good options because they provide a large amount of haste and main stat. The problem with these is that you have to PvP to get them. Aside from PvP, there aren't a whole lot of trinkets that are completely necessary with the Shaman toolkit. You may find yourself using something like Soul Igniter just to help improve AoE damage, although this trinket can be a liability sometimes. I would just end up using whatever high item level trinkets you find early on, mainly prioritizing stuff that helps your damage or stats. Keep in mind that there are several good dungeon trinkets, and in order to get them at a high item level, you need to loot them from your weekly Great Vault. It's best to do as many Mythic Plus runs as possible each week to increase your chance of getting one of the 226 item level versions. Although you won't always be using consumables, especially early on, it's a good idea to have them ready. For weapon enchant, I think Celestial Guidance is the best option, giving a nice int proc with fairly good uptime. For rings and gems, get one int gem and then prioritize haste, especially early on when your stat weights might not be ideal. There are also several enchants in Shadowlands that aren't present in BFA. Fortified Leech gives stamina and leech to your cape, Eternal Intellect gives int to your bracers, and Eternal Stats gives plus 30 all stats to your chest. This one might be obvious, but don't forget to grab some ethereal pomegranates from the innkeeper to restore mana in between pulls. There are also several unused consumables that are handy to have as well. Spectral Flask of Power should be your default choice for Flask. Have a large supply of spiritual healing and mana potions, as well as Hidden Spirit for invisibility skips. Instead of mana potions, try out the new Sacrificial Anima Potion. This potion makes your next 4 spells sacrifice health instead of mana. When paired with Chain Heal, can actually be more mana gain than any other potion. Although you can occasionally use potions for damage, I wouldn't recommend making a habit of it. Using a damage potion locks you out of using mana or invis potions for 5 minutes, and as a healer, I believe having the mana potion option is better than the slight damage boost. If you insist on using potions, pairing Phantom Fire potions with Shadow Core Oil seem like the right choice. Even without the potions, I'd be using Shadow Core Oil in Mythic Plus just for its slight damage boost. For food, you should be using Crown Roast for the haste buff. Heavy Desolate Armor kits increase stamina, so you should always keep these in your bags as well. As a legendary item for Mythic Plus, I think the best option early on is Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem. This legendary turns Mana Tide Totem into a powerful cooldown, reducing the mana cost and cast time of your healing wave and chain heal. This legendary is great for party healing large amounts of group damage and lets you keep your team up with chain heal without falling behind. Using this legendary, you have 4 moderately strong cooldowns at your disposal: Spirit Link, Ascendance, Healing Tide, and now Mana Tide. This means you're able to use a strong cooldown nearly every trash pull, and if you save them up, you can use them back to back to negate difficult bosses with high damage phases. Chains of Devastation is another interesting legendary that makes your next Chain Heal cast instant if you use Chain Lightning, and makes your next Chain Lightning cast instant if you use Chain Heal. It procs off of itself, so you can spam Chain Heal and Lightning back to back continuously throughout a pull while moving. This might seem incredibly powerful at first, just keep in mind that neither Chain Lightning or Chain Heal are generally super efficient spells. I think this legendary could be good situationally with certain affixes or dungeons, however, it wouldn't be the first one I would craft. The key to playing chains is to not go overboard with the Chain Heals and Lightnings. During a dangerous pull, just use it to sneak in a few Chain Lightnings when you couldn't otherwise. And on a lower damage pull, weave in the occasional Chain Lightning. That way if someone takes damage that Riptide can't heal, you can immediately use an instant cast Chain Heal to top up the group. Overall, I don't think there's a clear answer to what legendary is best, so don't stress out about making the wrong choice. I imagine there will be lots of top shamans trying different things early on. Your legendary isn't your only hard choice. There are also quite a few options for Covenant selection. Overall, I think the best option is Necrolord, giving you access to Primordial Wave. This Covenant ability can be used every 45 seconds, and it either applies Flame Shock or Riptide and does bonus damage or healing. Once you cast it, the next healing wave you do will cleave onto all allies with Riptide. This acts as an awesome mini party healing CD if you have many Riptides applied, and you can use it to help boost your damage or healing. This ability synergizes well with the Primal Tide Core legendary we'll talk about later and is the go-to raiding setup. Necrolord's signature ability, Fleshcraft, allows you to create a shield every 2 minutes around yourself, which will be anywhere between 20 to 50% of your total health pool, depending on if there are any dead enemies nearby. Personally, in dungeons, I found this kind of cumbersome to use as a healer. At the end of the pull, I'm often trying to drink for mana and catch up to my team. I didn't have time to be channeling this over and over in the dungeon. Do your best to sneak it in when possible, especially if there are breaks in the action. I think you may find more uses out of it in slower pugs than in the fast-paced dungeon groups timing the top keys. For Necrolord, I think the best Soulbind tree is Emony, down the left side. The very first node on the tree is nice, consistent primary stat boost for you and your allies. There are some other cool passives in the other Soulbind trees that may be situationally useful. However, for just raw healing and damage, I think Emony will be the best bet. If you're looking for a different playstyle, I've been seeing many shamans playing Kyrian as well as Venthyr. There are a lot of good builds across many of the covenants that I can't go into in the scope of this one video. I'd highly encourage you, if you like the way another covenant plays or looks, to give them a try. Necrolord absolutely isn't a clear winner. Venthyr seems like the highest overall damage, and Kyrian has some really nice Soulbind combos, and the most useful signature ability in Summon Steward. For potency conduits, I think the best pick is definitely Swirling Currents. This conduit increases the healing of your next 3 heals every time you cast Healing Stream or Cloudburst, and considering you're using them every 30 seconds, you get a ton of value from this. One of Shaman's biggest weaknesses in BFA was its single target healing, and Swirling adds a huge boost. For your second potency, you have many options depending on the situation. Tumbling Waves is a clear winner based off of only HPS, however the randomness element to the proc might make it feel a lot less inconsistent to use. Heavy Rainfall is nice, especially if you're struggling with Prideful. It boosts your healing tide a bit more, making it a more reliable cooldown when you know your party is going to be stacked in the healing rain as well. The last option is Embrace of Earth, which increases your healing done on Earth Shield even more. This is nice to have for tanks that are taking a bit too much damage. I think most healers know which kind of tanks I'm talking about. There really aren't many noteworthy finesse or endurance conduits for Shaman, so take whatever you think fits best. You can take one of each with this tree. I've been using Totemic Surge and Refreshing Waters, but all of the other options are honestly fine. Now on to talents. For Mythic Plus, this is the setup I've been liking the most. Undulation is extremely powerful in the first row, and synergizes well with Swirling Currents. With the combination of Swirling Currents and Undulation, you'll be able to do really strong single target on-demand healing with no ramp time. I've been preferring Ancestral Vigor in the 4th row over Earthen Wall. Earthen Wall is good for pulsing damage like Prideful, however, if you're able to handle the Prides, I think you'll get more value from AV. AV is just nicer overall, and giving people that extra 10% max health I think is much more likely to keep them alive. Cloudburst is a must take. I know there are a lot of healing stream Andes that don't want to have to worry about min-maxing it, but this spell is just so powerful against Prideful. Just focus on pressing Cloudburst often, and don't worry about trying to min-max the timing. Remember that Cloudburst only copies your healing, not the healing from totems. I'm never pressing my Cloudburst to activate it early, unless I think someone will die if I don't. On the last row, I think Ascendance is the go-to. It's a really powerful burst cooldown that can be useful on single target, and in dungeons, you just aren't pressing Chain Heal enough to make good use out of High Tide. Now that we have the setup out of the way, we can talk a bit more about gameplay. Although the Shaman rotation is very straightforward, it takes quite a bit of skill to weave in its utility while you're keeping everyone alive. Your 2 big healing abilities are Riptide and Healing Surge. Riptide has a nice initial heal and a heal over time effect after, and it enhances the next healing surge or wave you cast. Riptide has a cooldown, however you can't spam it, so in between Riptides you use Healing Surge. Healing Wave is an alternative that costs less mana, however its longer cast time makes it a bit less useful in Mythic Plus. You should only be using Healing Wave when you're worried about mana, or when you have a Primordial Wave proc active. Healing Rain is only good if your team is standing in it for a long time. I'm only really using Healing Rain against Prideful, or bosses where my team is stationary taking damage for the whole duration. Chain Heal is a little bit misleading. It feels great to press, but it isn't very efficient. Considering your Undulation, Swirling Currents, and Tidal Waves bonuses, you shouldn't be using Chain Heal very often. Weave them in occasionally when you're healing heavy group damage, but don't get stuck spamming them endlessly. Not only does Chain Heal cost a fair bit of mana, but your Riptides will fall. reducing the overall healing you are doing from pots and your primordial wave. During Ascendance, not much changes. You are still doing your same rotation, just keep in mind the splash healing only reaches 20 yards, so be near any allies that need healing. During Manatide, you mainly only want to be casting Healing Wave and Chain Heal if you're using the Manatide Legendary. This is the only time where it's good to spam cast Chain Heal, and the 50% reduced cast time makes Manatide Chain Heal spamming the best way to quickly catch up if your group needs heavy healing. Don't forget about Spirit Walker's Grace. This ability allows you to cast while moving. Get in the habit of using it before heavy movement phases of bosses. If you ever start a cast and have to cancel it to move, you can use Spirit Walkers mid-cast, so try to remember to use it so that you don't have to cancel casts very often. The Resto Shaman damage rotation is incredibly simple. Keep Flame Shock on as many targets as you can, and use Lava Burst whenever you have charges available. Lightning Bolt is your filler on single target, and Chain Lightning on multiple targets. If you're going into a pack, remember that you can use your Primordial Wave as a Flame Shock and immediately dot 2 targets on pull for extra Lava Burst procs. In the rotation section for each healer, I also want to talk about Prideful. It's going to be a big part of Mythic Plus in the first season of Shadowlands, and these things can be quite difficult to deal with. You'll find that DPS players generally want to hold cooldowns during Prideful so they can use them after with the buff, so it's important as a healer to have a strong grasp on how to heal these. Shaman are exceptional at dealing with Prideful, and you can handle up to 20 stacks without any major cooldowns. As soon as the Pride spawns, try to grab a drink for a few seconds just to get some extra mana if you're below 50%. Apply Flame Shock and use your Lava Burst charges right away before the damage gets severe. After about 10 seconds, make sure you have a Cloudburst running. Continue to maintain Cloudburst for the entire Prideful. If you have 2 charges going in, you can use 3 of them back to back to back. Apply Riptide on cooldown and keep Healing Rain on as many players as possible. Use Healing Surge on people who are dropping low, or Healing Wave if you're worried about mana. Throw in a few chain heals here or there, but make sure you're continuously putting your Riptides up and don't get caught spamming chain heal. As it nears 20 stacks, you may need to use a big cooldown. All of Shaman's cooldowns are honestly pretty good at dealing with Pride, so pick whatever you have available and stick with it. My go-to is to use Primordial Wave and Healing Tide with every Prideful, and if things get scary, I'll use SLT, Ascendance, or Manatide depending on what I have available after that. Remember, if someone's about to die, you can pop your Cloudburst early at any time, which should have an absolute ton of healing stored into it at this point. Although I've talked about most of Shaman's other cooldowns by now, I want to discuss SLT. Spirit Link Totem reduces damage by 10% and splits the health of all players inside every second. For almost all situations, if you have a couple people in SLT, they virtually can't die unless they get one shot. Because Shaman doesn't have an external damage cooldown like Ironbark or Blessing of Sac, it's common to use SLT specifically for the tank to help them mitigate incoming damage when they're out of juice. Don't be afraid to drop this on your tank and then hop in when he's in trouble. You can also use this to reduce overall group damage. It's great when there are dangerous boss mechanics that overlap, or with packs of mobs that target random players and you need to keep everyone topped. Astral Shift is your only real defensive ability, however 40% damage reduction every 90 seconds is pretty powerful. Make sure you have this on a bind you can reach quick in an emergency and press it often. Earth Elemental can be used to tank mobs, either when your tank dies or if stuff is just going out of control. Earth Ellie is pretty weak, so don't expect it to live long in higher key levels. Remember that you can target the Earth Ellie to heal it. Especially in situations when you have a tank death, this is very important. Earthbind and Capacitor Totem are highly underrated and are very helpful if used often. Earthbind slows mobs inside of it by 50% and is amazing for helping your tank kite. Capacitor is a 3-second AoE stun, however it takes 2 seconds to activate, so use it early in anticipation of important casts or just high damage. Tremor can also be used to remove fear, charm, or sleep effects. There aren't too many uses for Tremor in Shadowlands dungeons, but there are some, specifically in Theater of Pain and Necrotic Wake. One major difference between Shaman and all other healers is that you have an interrupt. Windshear isn't just an interrupt, but a strong one, with a short 12-second cooldown. As a healer, it can be hard to juggle using interrupts in dungeons while constantly staring at your party frames. Here's some advice that I've used to help me. Use Focus Target and Focus Target Interrupt. Move your focus frame near your party frames. That way when you're healing, you can still see the dangerous cast from your target. Focus target also stops you from losing an important interrupt caster while you're spreading flame shock or if you're clicking at an ally. Start with holding your interrupts for the most dangerous casts, ones that if they get off will wipe the group. If your team has these under control, then you can start using your interrupt to stop some of the lesser important ones that won't be kicked as often. At the end of the dungeon, check your interrupt totals. When you're learning, compete to try and get the most number of interrupts in a dungeon run. Even if you're mostly interrupting junk casts, this will train you to keep your eye on mobs and use your interrupt more regularly. Bloodlust is a pretty straightforward cooldown. It's group-wide, so normally it isn't only up to you. Generally, I let mages or DPS shamans handle it as they can line up their cooldowns more effectively. If you are the only lust, just pop it on pull for some dangerous bosses. It sounds silly, but don't be afraid to throw a bloodlust out if you think your team's in danger. When I was a beginner, I was worried about pressing bloodlust and getting flamed by my team for doing it at the wrong time. However, now that the consumable drums have been nerfed, it's time to learn. There's not much to say about raid. If you're playing Necrolord, you have great crossover with the same Soulbinds and Covenant abilities. The only difference is that you'll want to use the Primal Tidecore legendary. Primal Tidecore gives more consistent throughput and works passively throughout dungeons, throwing out free Riptides. It's the go-to legendary for raiding, so if you're concerned with raid, you may end up wanting to craft this one first. You'll be totally fine using it in Mythic Plus, since it still gives pretty consistent HPS. However, I generally prefer the Mana Tide for more on-demand healing. There are several things I wanted to include in this video, but couldn't as it's already going on 20 minutes now. Some topics include UI setup, macros, weak auras, and how to acquire the various legendaries and conduits discussed in this video. I'm going to leave links to all that stuff in the description for you guys to check out. If you have any questions, feel free to come say hi in my stream. I do my best to answer questions there. That covers everything you need to know about playing Restoration Shaman for the first season of Shadowlands. Thanks for watching. I'm considering making a more advanced guide down the road for specific Mythic Plus tips or maybe raid healing, so if that's something you'd be interested in, let me know in the comments which topics you think I should cover. If this video helped you, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribe to my channel. Happy keying!